Easy Explain on the Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche, second essay, sections 1 through 11. So the title of this second essay is Guilt, Bad Conscience, and the Like. And this video is just going to focus on about the first half of that essay, which is about sections 1 through 11. So starting with section 1, let's look at what Nietzsche's talking about here in terms of guilt and bad conscience and the like. So Nietzsche says to close the doors and windows of consciousness for a time, to remain undisturbed by the noise and struggle of our underworld of utility organs working with and against one another, a little quietness, a little tabula rasa of the consciousness, a little shout out to Locke there, to make room for new things, above all for the nobler functions and functionaries, for regulation, foresight, premeditation, for our organism is an oligarchy. Just going to keep going with this before we break it down a little bit. Nietzsche goes on, he says, that is the purpose of active forgetfulness, which is like a doorkeeper, a preserver of psychic order, repose, and etiquette, so that it will be immediately obvious how there could be no happiness, no cheerfulness, no hope, no pride, no present without forgetfulness. So here we're seeing a little bit of a callback to earlier in Genealogy, right? He was setting up at the end of the preface kind of the value of active forgetfulness, that as human beings we kind of need to forget sometimes to find peace and to really be doing what Nietzsche's going to think is, the right thing and to be living the right way, for lack of a better term. And well, as we go on to section 2, we're going to see why, right? Why he's prioritizing this forgetfulness. Nietzsche thinks the ability to not forget, to hold people in debt, as we will see, is a big problem that has caused us to measure value against each other and give rise to this idea of guilt, feeling guilty because we can't forget things, and just bad conscience. It all comes from not being able to forget. Let's go on to section 2. So Nietzsche says, the free man, the possessor of a protracted and unbreakable will, also possesses his measure of value. Looking out upon others from himself, he honors or he despises. And just as he is bound to honor his peers, the strong and reliable, those with the right to make promises, that is, all those who promise like sovereigns, reluctantly, rarely, slowly, who are chary of trusting, whose trust is a mark of distinction, who give their word as something that can be relied on, because they know themselves strong enough to maintain it in the face of accidents, even in the face of fate. Nietzsche loves fate. But again, I'm just going to continue on, and then we'll break down what he's saying here in section 2. So Nietzsche continues, the proud awareness of the extraordinary privilege of responsibility, the consciousness of this rare freedom, this power over oneself and over fate, has in his case penetrated to the profoundest depths and become instinct, the dominating instinct. What will he call this dominating instinct, supposing he feels the need to give it a name? The answer is beyond doubt. The sovereign man calls it conscience. So here in section 2, Nietzsche's looking at, okay, so we're not forgetting. Right, we're making promises, we're holding people to promises, we are being held to promises, and how we navigate that, how we address that becomes our conscience. Right, are we living up to them or are we not living up to them? If we're not, we become guilty, we have this bad conscience, and we can also put that on others. Right, and that's where we start to measure our values against each other. That's how we start to separate each other into good and bad. Moving on to section 3, just one little quip here. I thought it was good, though. Kind of paints a big picture for Nietzsche. He says, all religions at the deepest level are systems of cruelties. Because religions, he thinks, in structuring their moral laws and their moral orders, are maintaining this problem, right? This problem of guilt and bad consciousness and measuring values of, are you doing the right thing? Are you remembering and forgetting the right things? Or are you not, right? And this is a problem for Nietzsche. So moving on to section 5. He starts to look at this idea between punishment and, creditors and debtors. So let's get into it. Nietzsche says, in punishing the debtor, the creditor participates in a right of the masters. At last he too may experience for once the exalted sensation of being allowed to despise and mistreat someone as beneath him. Or at least if the actual power and administration of punishment has already passed to the authorities, in this case, maybe religious authorities, to see him despised and mistreated, that compensation then consists in a warrant for entitled to cruelty. So as we'll see in section 6, Nietzsche's saying here that, people like this feeling of being the master, of being the creditor and holding someone in debt. They like the feeling of having someone being beneath them And if they can't inflict the punishment, if the debt can't be paid, right, of those who are guilty, of those who are in bad conscience, then we like to see it, right? We like to see a religious authority or someone else in power, disposing that punishment. So let's go into section 6. That's what Nietzsche gets into here. He says, to see others suffer does one good. This is tragedy, right? This is one of Nietzsche's book, The Birth of Tragedy. To make others suffer even more. This is a hard saying, but an ancient, mighty, human, all too human principle. Again, another earlier work of Nietzsche's, to which even the apes might subscribe. For it has been said that in devising bizarre cruelties, they anticipate man and are, as it were, his prelude. Without cruelty, there is no festival. Thus the longest and most ancient part of human history teaches. And in punishment, there is so much that is festive. And again, Nietzsche, as an academic, scholarly philologist, going back to the primal meaning of fest, right? To be festive, to have a festival, right? Of sacrifice, right? This ancient human drive, this ancient human, what Nietzsche would say, need to be cruel, to punish, to inflict suffering, to make master, to punish others, right? That's what he's getting at here. Going into section 7, Nietzsche says, surely that philosophers' invention, so bold and so fateful, which was then first devised for Europe, the invention of free will, of the absolute spontaneity of man in good and in evil, was devised above all to furnish a right to the idea that the interests of the gods in man and human virtue could never be exhausted, that there would be no end to this, right, if humans have free will. There must never be any lack of real novelty, of really unprecedented tensions, complications, and catastrophes on the stage of Earth. The course of a completely deterministic world would have been predictable for the gods, and they would have quickly grown weary of it. So here Nietzsche is saying that we invented free will, this idea of free will, that we can enact good and evil on each other in light of each other. He thinks this comes from this grand narrative, this grand stage, that it must be the case that we have free will if the gods are interested in us, right? It comes back to this religious ideal. The gods are only going to be interested in us if we can surprise them, if we can do good and do bad, right? And there's no end to this if we have free will, because the gods are interested in us. They have to be interested in us. We have free will. We are interesting to watch. If everything was determined, the gods wouldn't be interested in us, right? But Nietzsche's saying this is ridiculous, right? Nietzsche's definitely going to learn more into the fated deterministic side. He thinks free will is an invention, and gods aren't interested in us if they even exist. So to move on to section 8 here, Nietzsche says, to return to our investigation, got a little sidetrack there, a little digression. The feeling of guilt, of personal obligation, had its origins, as we saw, in the oldest and most primitive personal relationship, that between buyer and seller, creditor and debtor. It was here that one person first encountered another person, that one person first measured himself against another. Man designated himself as the creature that measures values, evaluates and measures, as the valuating animal as such. And man likes this, right? Egotistically, man is driven by this, that we do need to measure ourselves up against each other. We hold people to certain values and to certain expectations and guilts. And that's a problem for Nietzsche, right? He's uncovering this and he's saying, look, this is where all the problems in the world are coming from right now. So to wrap up the first part here of the second essay, we're going to look in section 10 at a central motif for Nietzsche. Nietzsche says the justice which began with, everything is dischargeable, everything must be discharged, ends by winking and letting those incapable of discharging their debt go free. It ends, as does every good thing on earth, by overcoming itself. Again, this big idea of overcoming, of self-overcoming, of the will to power. This overcoming, self-overcoming of justice. One knows the beautiful name it has given itself, mercy. Right here, Nietzsche's defining mercy as the self-overcoming of justice. You are overcoming justice. That is showing mercy. You're actually not going to have justice be done. You're going to show mercy instead. It goes without saying that mercy remains the privilege of the most powerful man, or better, his beyond the law. Right, so mercy is something for those that are in power. Again, he's tying it to this big theme of his, this self-overcoming. We're going to see more of that as we continue in the second essay, and especially as we get into the third essay. But for now, this is the first part, about the first half of the second essay. For now, I hope it helps.